Despite being battered in the last election after presenting voters with a string of failed migrant policies, the Tories are back at it again this morning, with Kemi Badenoch calling for migrants to be denied any human rights protections to fight deportation. Does this mean the leader considers migrants to be less human than the rest of us? Because that's how it sounds to these ears. Despite the fact that public services are failing, inflation is rising and Europe is at risk of being dragged into war with Russia, for the Sunday Telegraph, Badenoch's latest dog whistle is, what does the paper call it, her most significant policy announcement to date. Really? Really? No wonder Britain's broken. According to the right-wing rag, the Tory leader wants to disapply the Human Rights Act to all immigration cases, which will be music to the ears of the paper's rapidly diminishing readership. And the Telegraph suggests this moves the Tories closer to withdrawing from the European Convention on Human Rights and thus undoing Winston Churchill's vision for the Great Charter of Human Rights after the war, which he said wanted to protect the right to life, to liberty and security of person, to free speech, to a fair trial, to free and fair elections, and to freedom from torture, slavery and discrimination. I suspect our great war hero, voted our greatest ever Briton in 2002, will be rolling in his grave if Kemi Badenoch gets her way. Perhaps more pressingly still, though, Badenoch wants partisan politicians and not impartial judges to decide migration cases, deportation cases. These cases, she implies, see, quote, extremely distorted interpretations of international laws. OK. Well, I seem to remember Badenoch in the last Tory government forced Parliament to declare Rwanda, currently involved in a proxy war in Congo, to declare it a safe place in order to bypass international laws and start shipping people there. A pretty good example, I would have said, of distorted interpretation of international law, but this was by politicians against legal advice, and it cost £1 billion was wasted on that nonsense. But that's not going to stop the Tories tabling an amendment to the government's border security bill. Under the proposal, Britain wouldn't leave the European Convention on Human Rights, but British judges wouldn't be able to rule on migrant cases anymore. Any migrants wishing to oppose deportation would have to take their case to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg instead. Worth remembering that none of this will have any effect on the record levels of migration we've seen of late, legal migration, the hundreds of thousands who come here every year on visas. And while Badenoch is looking at new ways of undermining our courts, it's worth remembering that irregular migrants arriving by boat, the numbers have gone slightly down of late. So, I mean, I'm more concerned, quite frankly, with Kemi Badenoch trying to take judging decisions away from judges. That's what troubles me most. 03456060973 is the number for your reaction. Should I be focusing perhaps on this idea that Kemi Badenoch feels that migrants don't qualify for human rights, that they are less human than the rest of us, which I am profoundly uncomfortable with. Just absolutely anathema to me.
My point is that if you remove the protection of the Human Rights Act from one section of society, it becomes a lot easier to remove from others, including yours. And I think that may have been overlooked.
I think you're on the money with that for sure, Mike. I have to say that Alex's message I've just read out, I think he's taken the discussion on a bit there, because as soon as I read it, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. That if you can show that Strasbourg is in conflict with the sovereignty of the UK by forcing us to accept asylum seekers that have a legal right to be here, by forcing us to do our legal duty, you're setting up a clash between Strasbourg and the UK that would make it easier for us to leave that convention.
Well, yes, I think it's a bit convoluted, but I certainly agree with the sentiment. The one that comes to me is I'm over 75, in fact I'm well over 75, and I have a right to life under the Human Rights Act.
Yes, you do.
Yes. Now, if it were removed from illegal immigrants or migrants or whatever the noun you wish to use, it's removed from them, then the right to life could be removed from me, because now, although I'm still working, thank God, but most of my colleagues are not, so we are a burden on the state. And if we've got a war to fight in Ukraine, might have a war to fight with Russia, not too far down the line, can we afford to supply me with free medicine and bus passes and all the other bits and pieces?
Don't say this, Mike. Don't say this.
Well, there you go. And when you think about it, the assisted dying bill was exactly that. Rather that, if you don't survive,
I would say that's how it's been portrayed by those who oppose the assisted dying bill. For those of us who've witnessed people dying in agony, who've begged for the right to go in a more humane way, I see it completely differently. But I can understand.
You've only got to extend it a bit. If there's no right to life under the Human Rights Act that applies to you, well, I'm very sorry, Mike, but you've had a good innings, and yes.
I hear your concerns that an attack on one group of people's human rights could very well lead to attacks on other human rights. Just to be absolutely clear, Mike, are all human beings worthy of human rights?
Damn right they are. Yeah, and I'm nicking a line from James O'Brien. He's not my favourite person in the world, but if you've got a problem and then you blame them over there, it's all their fault. They haven't got a right to be, and they haven't got a right to the courts, and they haven't got a right to legal representation. All those pesky lawyers get in the way. Let's do away with all that and ship them out. So we'll take away their rights under the Human Rights Act. Oh, by the way, you're costing us a fortune too, so you can go too.
Mike, I say again, no, I don't say such things, but I hear what you're saying, and I'm sympathetic to those feelings, regretfully, but I am sympathetic to those feelings. I just hope they don't come to pass.
I'll tell you why I phoned you, Matthew. I was a bit peeved that you're saying this country's broken. You better believe it's broken. We can't even get access to a dentist or NHS for the amount of migrants that are coming over.
Nothing to do with government policy, then? Over the years, taking dentists out of the essentially out of the NHS.
But when I say to you, Matthew, you're the one that promotes it every week. The poor immigrants, the poor. What about the poor people in this?
Do they qualify for human rights, David?
No,
that's the question.
Say something, Matthew.
No, just asking the question.
Matthew, I've got birth certificates to prove where I was born. All right, in London, brought up in Scotland. But all I hear is the poor migrants. Some of them.
Okay. So migrants are taking away your dentist. I get that. So do we take away their human rights as a retaliatory move, or is that vindictive?
They're using the human rights through the lawyers, and they're getting away with sort of murder, and some of them are getting away with murder. Grow up, young man. I'm 75 and I'm sick of it. That's all I'm going to say.
So you're not going to answer the question then?
The question is that you turned round. When you came on, you said this country's broken.
No, but I said the question is: are migrants worthy of human rights, or do you consider to be less than human?
They're not all worthy. The good ones, yes, not the ones that come over to do us harm. And if you
so some of them are okay. Some of them are okay. Some of them are not. But we'll never find out if the okay ones are okay because we just want to deport them.
You're a proponent for them all to come. Everyone.
Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm all right. I try not to be riled up by people that start screaming about migrants and don't feel they sort of qualify as fellow human beings. But hey, we've all got different opinions.
Yeah, I have a different view to your previous caller. I think we just need to take a step back when it comes to thinking about human rights. And the very definition implies that they are rights that should be entitled to all human beings. And I think it's more of a set of guidelines, if you like, as to the minimum standards of behaviour that will allow us to flourish as a species, quite frankly. So the idea that you have an act of parliament or a law that can dictate who and who is not entitled to those doesn't make sense to me. I think its job is there to articulate and to clarify what we really all know are those standards of behaviour.
Do you... I've still got the message up, Alex, it was. And I think as soon as I read it, I thought, this makes sense. That if Kemi was to get her way and Strasbourg started processing deportation claims, we could have refugees brought to our country, sent to our country by Strasbourg, which you can already see. How dare Strasbourg send these people to our country? And the next thing you know, we'll be out of the European Convention on Human Rights.
But I think for me, that's whether you're in or out of the convention, it doesn't change the obligation of people to do the right thing and for governments to reflect what their population really wants to do. So, you can opt in or out of a specific group of organisations, but you still have that requirement.
Okay. Do you feel that anyone who arrives at this country, do you feel every human should be entitled to those human rights?
I do, yes. And I think if you're looking at that from a global point of view, then, migration is a symptom of a problem, not the cause of the problem. Because if those rights were being maintained globally, then the need to be refugees would not be there.
Nicely said, James. Oh, that's a hole in one as far as I'm concerned.